Charlie, if we look at all the major issues in today's world, be they social or be they science and religion or all kinds of things, if you dig down deep enough, consciousness and what is consciousness is at the root of a great many of our issues. So I'm going to focus on that. And the way I want to start is by seeing what are the avenues that we can get at consciousness. And I want to list four and see how you can define them. We have psychology, we have neuroscience, we have what you've been involved in with transpersonal psychology and parapsychology. So give me your sense of those four on how they help us understand consciousness.
Something you'll hear a lot when you talk about gender ideology in school is that people are saying, oh, like, what's wrong with teaching acceptance and, inclusion?
I'm for all of them and probably more that I don't even know about yet.
Well, yes, they're not teaching just acceptance and inclusion, which I would have no problem with.
I mean, of course, the neuroscience approach is very useful. Even if you're a dualist like I am in a practical sense and think of the mind as driving the car of the body, the more we know about the car, the more we know about how it can be driven for better or worse and so forth.
They're teaching kids to question their own gender.
So the more we know about the brain functioning, great. The psychological approach, of course, is very important. We have models of how to run the world that are based on people being completely rational, for instance. But even knowing a little psychology, people aren't completely rational. And so we have to begin to take that into account.
They're teaching concepts like assigned female at birth and assigned male at birth. Those concepts are incorrect. They're just wrong. Teaching wrong things in school should be a problem in and of itself. We should not permit that. But to go even further,
as to the transpersonal, which I think is really important, transpersonal is a fancy word for spiritual. Okay, I'll tell you, it's because spiritual is such a loaded word, okay? Back in 1975, for instance, I had a book coming out called Spiritual Psychologies, in which I had asked people in 8 different spiritual traditions to write about that spiritual path as a psychology rather than as a spiritual thing to make it more accessible in the modern world. Well, the book was about to go in press and I got a call from my editor saying good news and bad news. The good news is that the Major Psychology Book Club wants to have it as its monthly selection. All right. The bad news is that this is a psychology book club. Psychologists cannot handle the word spiritual. We have to name it something else. So I said, okay, we'll call it transpersonal psychology because hardly anybody knew what that meant.
See, when you use a phrase like assigned female or assigned male at birth, you're encouraging kids and teaching them that they should and can question their own gender identity.
But it's trans in the sense of transcending. It's about a psychology that says that some sort of spiritual experience is an essential part of being human. And instead of just kind of shoving it off into the religion corner, let's study it. Let's see what kind of experiences people have, what they do with those, how they use them in a healthy way or a non-healthy way.
That's wrong. It's dangerous. It potentially leads to medicalization, and we don't want that. And as parents, we should have the right to opt out of that and not have that taught to our kids.
To me, transpersonal psychology then is an attempt to bring science and spirituality together in a constructive way. That psychology can ask questions, for instance, about what kind of spiritual growth techniques are actually effective for what kind of person. Instead of, this is the ancient technique used by the yogis of old, you must do it exactly this way. We can find out what really works and how that actually works.
Examples are like the genderbread person, the snow person, and the gender unicorn. You can Google all of those things. Those are like specifically geared towards really young children, and it teaches you that you can have like this mismatch between your gender identity, this fairy tale concept in everyone's head that we're all supposed to have this gender identity, which you can't see, you can't confirm, and you can't know what your gender is versus what someone else's gender is, because we all live in our own heads.
Fourth category, parapsychology.
Parapsychology is particularly important because the modern view of mainstream materialistic science is that the mind is nothing but the brain. It's all confined in here. And so spiritual ideas or religious ideas about God or gods, prayer, things like that, they're all nonsense.
Gender expression and your sex. Anyway, it's a bunch of nonsense, it's dangerous, and it's not teaching just acceptance and inclusivity. Like, if we wanted to just teach that, we would just teach, hey, there are trans people in the world and we should respect and accept them for who they are.
Now the trouble is that human beings continue to have spiritual experiences, and when you tell them those experiences are nonsense, you make people sick. You make people, you invalidate part of people's own soul.
No, we're teaching way beyond that. It's like if we were teaching about religions and we said, hey, just because you're Christian assigned at birth, maybe we should see if you're Muslim or if you're Jewish. Like, how about we look inside of our souls and really, assess whether, let's go on a religion journey and decide whether you're some other religion other than the one that you were born in or that your parents raised you as.
Well, of course, if it is all nonsense, maybe you're doing them a service, even if it's difficult. But if there's something real to what underlies spirituality, we need to know that. And that's where parapsychology is very important. We're using the best kind of experimental scientific methods. I think we've shown that several different types of psychic abilities, ESP, actually exist. And so they don't say, that the Baptists know more than the Buddhists or something like that, but they say there's something real about the spiritual nature of human beings. Don't just throw it out. Try to study it and refine our knowledge.
Or we could say non-physical in the parapsychological world, because that may be a more neutral term than spiritual.
I mean, that would be just as ridiculous. This is what we're doing to kids and confusing them. And at a very young age. I mean, I found lesson plans for kids from kindergarten and the first grade, okay, where they talk about like pink and blue and what gender expression is and stuff. It's just...
If you want to be very conservative, yes, you can say that given what we know about, say, extrasensory perception at this point, it's non-physical. Okay, it's not, for instance, telepathy, for instance, is not some kind of mental radio, because we know how radio works. You've got to generate some electromagnetic waves. They have to be
It's too weak, if it doesn't fall off with distance.
Shielding doesn't affect it, so we know it's not like that kind of thing.
So of these four categories, I think it would be fair to say psychology and neuroscience, your mainstream, everybody would agree with that. The last two categories, transpersonal or spiritual psychology, to kind of let it out of the closet, and parapsychology, the existence of non-physical things, set your view apart from perhaps mainstream science, although there's a large number of people who subscribe to that. So you would have all four be windows on this concept of consciousness.
Right.
It's too much. Leave our kids alone. Let kids be kids. There's no reason to create these lesson plans that present false information about whether you can be a different gender and confuse kids and encourage them to get in their head about something that isn't even real.
My whole approach to life has always been to look at everything that's relevant to a situation instead of coming up with my favorite theory and say, this is it, and don't bother me with anything else.
One of the favorite things that you like to say is you don't want to be a fool and believe something that is just patently wrong.
That's right. I hate to be fooled. It's embarrassing. And I know something like parapsychology is very controversial among some mainstream scientists, actually, usually the older ones who are more identified with current theories and the like. But my finding has been that the more opposed mainstream scientists are to parapsychology, the less they actually know about what the data actually is, the quality of it, and so forth. So we're dealing with prejudice among human beings.
Let's look at consciousness now from a systems point of view.